Campus sex show controversy. Amherst College faces backlash over explicit orientation skits featuring simulated sex act. Amherst College, one of the nation's most prestigious liberal arts institutions, is facing sharp criticism from students after an orientation performance allegedly featured participants mimicking sexual acts and tossing condom into the audience. Now we'll take closer analytical look at this story on the AI podcast.
Okay, let's get into this. We're doing a deep dive that really focuses on the high-pressure world of elite higher education. And that very fine, sometimes invisible line between mandatory programming and, personal boundaries.
Right.
Our subject today is Amherst College. It's one of the most prestigious liberal arts schools in the country, and right now it's dealing with a really intense controversy about its Welcome Week traditions.
And that's the core tension right there. For you, the listener, you expect a certain level of intellectual rigor from a place like Amherst.
Of course.
So the source of this conflict is pretty surprising. It all centers on this annual mandatory orientation event for first-year students. It's called Voices of the Class.
And the issue isn't even what they were talking about. It was sexual health and respect, which is a standard topic.
Exactly. It's all about how they chose to deliver that message.
Absolutely. We are not talking about some dry lecture or, a standard seminar here. The whole controversy comes from the really explicit, very physical, and frankly shocking content of this mandatory performance, which, according to a lot of sources, a lot of students, just crossed a serious line. It went into deeply disturbing territory.
So we're really setting the stage for a classic institutional dilemma, How far can a college push the boundaries in the name of education and harm reduction before that same pressure just completely undermines the goal of the lesson itself?
So our mission today is to really unpack every single layer of this story. We need to detail the specific actions in the performance that caused the outrage.
Yeah, and analyze the student reaction, that feeling of being trapped in a space that's supposedly dedicated to sexual respect.
That paradox is key. And then finally, we have to dissect the college's official defense and this whole debate over whether shock-based education even works.
This deep dive, I think, it really helps us understand not just one campus controversy, but that fundamental struggle that modern universities face. Balancing their commitment to proactive social education with the need to ensure student comfort and agency.
Let's start with the performance itself. The specifics are just crucial to understanding why the backlash was so strong.
Right.
I mean, orientation events are usually kind of tedious, maybe a little awkward. They don't typically have content so explicit it makes national news. So what exactly did these first-year students see?
Well, we have some details from reporting, including from the Washington Free Beacon, which got footage and student accounts. And they confirmed the performance was highly explicit.
And this is a required event, right?
Right.
At a school that costs nearly $100,000 a year.
Required, yes. The performance included actors performing scenes under blankets. And according to the reports, this involved really loud moaning and the clear simulation of sexual acts.
Right in front of the entire incoming class.
The entire...
And it wasn't just, simulation and sounds. The sources really make a point of noting the use of props, specifically condoms.
Yeah, the condoms.
They were reportedly tossed into the audience, like confetti. Just think about that for a second, that staging choice.
It turns a serious subject into a spectacle.
Exactly. Complete with this, like celebratory but also really jarring prop giveaway.
That's a huge directorial choice. It signals a real commitment to a certain kind of shock and confrontation. But here's what makes it uniquely problematic.
The script.
The script itself. This is not some generic play. The tradition is to use out-of-context excerpts from the incoming students' own admissions essays.
Why?
Their own personal writings, which they shared thinking it was private, just for their application.
Okay, we have to pause on that detail, the admissions essays. Why? Why would Amherst choose such a high-risk personalization strategy?
Well, the theory...
Is it supposed to make it more relatable? Because it sounds like what many students felt was a huge ethical intrusion.
It speaks to a very specific, and I would argue pretty misguided pedagogical theory. The idea that personalized content, cuts through the noise.
So the intent might have been to make the themes feel immediate, to show students that the anxieties, the experiences, they belong to their group.
Right. But when you take highly intimate, maybe even vulnerable admissions and you pair them with wildly graphic, simulated sexual content.
The educational motive just gets lost.
It gets completely lost, and the result is this profound amplification of the sense of intrusion. For some students, it was a genuine betrayal of trust.
Exactly. It almost weaponizes the trust they put in the school during the application process. So that personal element combined with the graphic content, that's a key that turns simple discomfort into, a feeling of violation.
And these are newcomers.
Yeah, they're already dealing with information overload, anxiety, a huge life transition.
They're at their most vulnerable. And several students were just absolutely shocked. They confirmed the display was far more graphic than they felt was appropriate for a...
So what words were they using?
When you look at the language they used afterwards, it tells the whole story. They didn't just feel awkward, they felt uncomfortable and, crucially, trapped.
That idea of being trapped in a mandatory setting is so critical here. It directly contradicts the fundamental principles of the very lessons the college claims it's trying to teach.
It does.
If the goal is promoting consent and boundaries, forcing students to stay in a deeply uncomfortable environment creates a massive, debilitating paradox.
The lack of agency is the central friction point. When
Yeah.
you mandate attendance, you implicitly remove the student's ability to consent to the viewing experience.
Right.
And if the content is highly sensitive, sex, boundaries, and you take away the off-ramp, you risk replicating the very experience of boundary violation you're trying to educate them against.
Yeah, and we have a specific example of this. The testimony of a junior, Isabella Niemi. She was so disturbed she actually considered leaving just 10 minutes in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She said, and I'm quoting here, she's not someone who breaks rules or skips mandatory events, but the display was disgusting enough it almost forced me to leave.
So when a student who sees herself as a rule follower considers breaking orientation rules just for self-preservation,
Then the program has clearly failed in its duty of care.
and it seems like this wasn't just a few students overreacting. I mean, this is an annual tradition at Amherst, right? So upperclassmen, staff, they've seen it before. But sources confirm that several students insisted this year's show was significantly more extreme than in previous years.
So it was an escalation.
It suggests an active escalation in the shock tactics, maybe trying to combat orientation fatigue or something, but it just fundamentally misinterpreted where the line was.
So the delivery escalated, the discomfort escalated, and the backlash escalated. Which brings us to the institutional defense.
Right. How did they justify this?
This wasn't some rogue event. This was sanctioned. It was defended by Amherst officials. How on earth did they justify mandating a graphic presentation that so clearly distressed students?
Well, the college's defense came from officials like Amanda Van, she's the school's director of health and well-being, and they laid out a very clear rationale.
Okay.
They said the skits are part of a broader commitment to promoting well-being and sexual respect on campus. They were positioning this not as entertainment, but as essential educational therapy.
And the stated goals are, genuinely high-minded. They said the purpose was to encourage honest discussions among students.
Right, about topics that are often shrouded in silence and shame. They're trying to tackle the culture around sex and assault head-on.
So what were the specific topics?
To be precise, the skits were intended to cover boundaries, communication, sexual safety, harm reduction, and self-care.
Okay, all good things.
All good things. The official argument is that by presenting these challenging themes in what they called an engaging format, which clearly meant shocking format, it helps students develop awareness and foster a respectful community.
So the college is basically betting that the immediate shock and discomfort will lead to better, more lasting educational outcomes than a traditional lecture would.
That's the bet they made.
But let's challenge that. Let's really challenge that philosophy. If we assume they're operating with the best intentions, promoting sexual respect, promoting well-being, why use a method that risks alienating or even harming students who might have trauma?
That is the necessary point of friction here.
When a program is this explicit and it's mandatory, how does Amherst square its goal of well-being with the very real chance of triggering a crucial subset of the student body?
They can't. The modern best practice for education on sensitive topics, especially sexual violence and boundaries, is trauma-informed care.
And what does that mean exactly?
A trauma-informed approach prioritizes choice, collaboration, trustworthiness. And it always minimizes potentially triggering content or environments. Amherst's approach, explicit, graphic, and mandatory is the absolute antithesis of that model.
The opposite.
The complete opposite. By prioritizing shock value to get engagement, they sacrifice the safety and agency required for effective, inclusive, trauma-informed education.
So they might have aimed for honest discussions, but they failed to provide the necessary conditions, safety, choice, agency, for those discussions to be constructive for everyone.
Exactly.
Which brings us squarely to the central question, efficacy. Did the graphic nature, the forced shock value of this program, did it ultimately help or hurt the college's stated educational goals?
Well, the consensus among the critics is that it severely hurt the goals. There was a statement from a junior, John Collier, that I think just perfectly encapsulated the failure.
What did he say?
He argued that the intended message, all those excellent bullet points about sexual safety and harm reduction, was entirely overshadowed by the forced shock value.
That sounds like a classic case of pedagogical overreach. He acknowledged the good intent, right?
Oh, yeah. He recognized that Amherst might be trying to remove the taboo behind sex on campus, which is a legitimate goal.
Yeah.
But he just felt the execution had gone way too far.
And he had a final verdict on it.
He did. He said the way the content was forced in our faces does the exact opposite of what they intended.
It creates this cognitive dissonance that's it's almost impossible for a newcomer to process constructively.
Yes.
You have the institution demanding respectful communication and boundaries, while at the same time violating the student's own comfort boundaries by forcing them into this non-consensual viewing experience.
The delivery method completely nullified the content.
Now, to play devil's advocate for a second, one might argue that if the performance wasn't this graphic, if it was just another dry lecture, it would be totally forgettable background noise. In the context of the huge information overload during orientation, isn't some shock necessary to cut through and make sure students remember the key takeaways about safety?
And that's the exact calculation the program's creators were probably making. They chose visibility and memorability over safety and inclusivity. But the flaw in that logic is that while the shock ensures memorability, what you remember is wrong.
What do you mean?
The content of the memory becomes, I felt disgusted and trapped, rather than, I learned about communication and harm reduction. The memory is tied to the trauma of the delivery, not the educational substance.
So the campus did get the intense conversation the college wanted.
They did.
But the conversation was focused on institutional overreach and student violation, not on boundaries and consent itself. The college basically made its own orientation program the central example of boundary pushing without consent.
Precisely. And while Amherst still maintains its commitment to sexual health education, the outcome of this has forced some necessary internal conversations on campus.
As it should.
These discussions are now rightly focused on reevaluating these mandatory orientation rituals. They have to ask, if the method of education makes students feel unsafe, is that program, no matter how good its intentions are, ultimately doing more harm than good?
This whole deep dive is just such a powerful example of that conflict between institutional intent and individual experience.
Yeah.
The college wanted to promote safety and respect.
Yes.
But by mandating an overly explicit boundary-violating program, it created an environment where students felt uncomfortable, distressed, and trapped.
It raises a fundamental, really uncomfortable question that every institution has to consider.
Yeah.
And it's one we have to leave you, the listener, to mull over. If the foundational goal of a program like this is to teach young adults about communication, consent, and respecting boundaries, does requiring attendance at a performance that actively violates their personal comfort zones and their sense of agency, does that fatally undermine the very lessons the program claims to teach?
It forces us to ask whether mandatory programming, especially when it deals with intimate and sensitive topics, can ever truly coexist with the foundational concept of personal consent.
And whether the pressure on universities to visibly do something about sexual safety leads them to choose provocative actions that look effective on paper, but completely fail the students who need that education the most.
The controversy at Amherst suggests the answer might be a resounding no.
Well, what is going on? Okay, one question for you. Did Amherst College cross a line by showing explicit content to first-year students during mandatory orientation? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.